As the show continues on now, I'm happy to be in the offices of the Shelton School District Superintendent, Wyeth. Jessee, how are you?
I'm doing all right.
We are here filming on the 4th of October. It's a Monday afternoon, and today kind of marks what we're looking ahead to have the vaccine mandates and vaccinations in for the staff of the Shelton School District by October 16th. Is that correct?
October 18th.
October 18th. And the 4th would have been the last day to start that process to get fully immunized from those shots. How is it going in the Shelton School District? Do you have any numbers about the vaccination rates? And then let's talk about some of the exemptions. People are asking me some questions about that.
Sure. So Governor Inslee had mandated in mid-August, so it's only been about 6-7 weeks of this mandate to have public employees, those who specifically are in K-12 public education, our employees, if you're here, have to get vaccinated. And so that process has been taking place since the announcement of it. Of course, with everything else, with these new regulations and mandates that we receive, there's a little bit of the sense making, right, Jeff? And we're just had done that up front, and it got really clear, which was good for us, since the vaccinations were not a new thing, and public health had been doing plenty of push out there for folks to get vaccinated to help us get on the other side of this particular pandemic. And so with that mandate, specifically for the employees of the state, we have to follow those rules and have been taking place. I think the other thing I would add to that is just simply, awareness for employees, because we're still having to call some people and said, please provide us with your vaccination cards today, even today. And so we've made phone calls and emails last week, following up with all of our employees who we haven't received vaccination cards from. I believe we had 30 already early this morning. Like it was kind of stop on my way to work or email it or text this to us. Obviously, it's confidential, so we have isolated to our human resources department to collect that information, and so it's still coming in by the hour, literally, to help get that information.
When it comes to the opportunities for those who feel that they have grounds for exemptions, religious exemptions or medical exemptions. A couple of folks have stopped me in the community and asked me if I get a chance to talk to you. How does that work? How do those medical or religious exemptions work?
Yeah, that's the other side of this process. So when Governor Inslee makes a mandate, then there have been outstanding in this state 2 things that can lead to an exemption. One is a medical exemption, and the other one is a religious exemption. So they put out there the medical one, talking to medical providers. It was a pretty stringent reason to provide for an exemption. Is this truly, are you immune compromised, high risk, maybe an allergic to reaction to the vaccine itself? And then, you work with those folks on that, and the medical provider with just like a doctor's note as usual that you would provide. So we're pretty used to that kind of operation. Obviously, we have that with students and staff. The one that was new for us or newer in public education is this religious exemption for employees specific to this vaccine, right? We may have those religious exemptions on student vaccination and had those in the past, but now we're talking about something different for employees. So we followed the state's guidelines. The Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction put out some guidance around that. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is another agency that has things around accommodations and exemptions. We put out the information. Do you want to file for a religious exemption, if not the medical one? We took in all that information. We received 54.
Okay.
Jeff, 54 applications for exemptions. Took those in. They provided also in that application, it's a form letter that was provided by the state, what other additional accommodations do you want, if any? just to at least get that information in writing as we get advice from the employee themselves. We had a team of folks review those particular applications, both medical and religious, went through those, and then we went back out to them, called them individually about their application, and talked it through with them. And then if they were granted that exemption, which every single employee was, then we have to talk about accommodations.
Yeah.
Which is a different process.
So when it comes to that, will those folks be able to come on to the respective campuses that they teach at or to the office with additional testing requirements? How does that going to work?
Yeah, so in that review process, when we're going to go back out and talk to employees, like here's some things that we would want to do to provide you, an accommodation. The governor set the bar. The bar is, are you going to provide the level of safety that vaccination can produce in a work environment? So that applies across, all these agencies. So when we looked at it, we obviously have some employees that, don't have a lot of interaction
Sure.
or in a tight setting like we are.
Yeah.
And so those folks are easy because we can do things like through scheduling, maybe adjustments, additional masking, just kind of isolation in some cases to do their job and do it so that they don't have, interactions with folks or even by happenstance, shall we say. Then there's the ones where we're looking at accommodations where you are in close proximity to people to do your job. So you have your major job responsibilities. Can you do them the way it is set up now to meet that threshold? Well, working in schools, you're in schools a lot, Jeff. People are really close to one another.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of restaurants, even stadiums now, have this requirement to be vaccinated or tested, even outside. We know in schools they are close in proximity. And so we, with that threshold set by the governor, said, hey, can we do your major job responsibilities and keep you and others safe? Does this endanger the safety of others? And so that's a high bar for us. In some cases, we were not able to come to an accommodation for it because simply masking is not still at the same level as a vaccinated individual. And testing, by nature, is latent. It's a tool that we can use, but it doesn't give you right on the spot,
Right.
do you have it or not, as a student or a staff member, to know, are you transmitting it? If it's up to 5 days delayed,
Sure.
that in a close proximity, just even on our own case tracking, is looking across, and we're finding that if there is transmission, it is because people were in close proximity and talking to one another, even with masks on.
And when you talk to your staff and the teachers and folks like that and explain this through, do you also look at it from if a parent is asking these questions on how can I make sure that my kid is safe going into those classroom settings? Am I guaranteed that the staff that will be teaching my student is vaccinated? I mean, I can see that you are working with the teachers on this side, but it's the parents and the kids on the other side too. So how does that work?
Yeah, so entering in the school district here over the summer, that was actually where a lot of my questions were. How are you going to guarantee safety for my student? And also staff were also like, hey, I'm very fearful. And so I heard that. And so, you take obviously the steps. People have been living through the pandemic of what you would do to keep people safe. And for our students, we know that, I hear directly, like, keep my students safe. How are you going to do that? We recently did a survey from our parents. About 630 parents responded to a survey that let us know, hey, it's keep in-person services, but also please keep my kids safe or not. Yes, I have heard from some other parents, hey, I don't, get rid of the mask, And so I think the thing that I've noticed in being out there and listening to people is, hey, here's my individual right. but here's the collective wealth of other people. And so with this pandemic, again, we all have to do our part to keep everybody safe. It's a tough challenge. I don't like wearing the mask either, Jeff. I would love to get rid of it. But unfortunately, I know that I could possibly help transmit this virus, and I would feel really terrible about that. I have to do my responsibility to ensure that I'm not spreading it. And so that's what the collective whole is expecting. My last piece is, which I've used to illustrate how serious this is the fact that we have over 100 students that are immune compromised in this district. They come to school, their parents are expecting us to keep them safe, and they are at high risk of not only contracting it, but possibly even serious harm or death. My responsibility is to try to ensure safety at all, and I don't think we can compromise on that need of those students and also staff who are also immune compromised for that. And so that's been the toughest thing about this is we want to keep all our employees. We want to keep them here and keep them and keep everybody safe at the same time.
I was at the Capitol, driving by the Capitol over the weekend and noticed some gatherings, some protesting, and I've heard the same types of similar things happening in the Shelton School District, perhaps walkouts or gatherings at the office here or at schools. And while folks have that right to gather and protest and explain what's going on in their own minds, what do you say to those? And I know that some of the schools are going through testing right now too, and so that could be a real distraction for the students. And what do you have to say about those types of things?
So prior to the pandemic, there were protests. During this pandemic, it seems like there's been an uptick in the number of protests and where people are at. To hear that there would be more protests, one, doesn't necessarily come as a surprise, but also, as you're stating, is disruptive to learning. The goal here is to keep in-person learning. Not everybody's going to agree about the strategy or the process to keep in-person learning, but everybody wants to keep these students in school and safe and learning. That is our goal right now in this district, because we know that students are social creatures and they learn best with one another. And how can we support that is keeping it going, making sure people are safe. And they're not having to quarantine either. 14 days is a long time, Jeff. Kids, but I do, and if my kid was out for 14 days, that's a lot of learning.
Yeah.
My kids couldn't handle doing that and keeping their grades up. You know, if you're thinking about high schooler and getting credits, that could be really hard. Yes, we provide educational services supports, but if you're missing those number of days, really rough. Taking a protest and missing any more school is part of that. Every hour is counting for us. And I'm really hoping that people are thoughtful about that. I understand voice and activism is important. No doubt about it. Being civic-minded, absolutely something we want to teach. At the same time, we have to recognize there is, again, sometimes outcomes or ripple effects that can happen when we make certain choices. And so we just want to make sure we're helping to remind people. We sent an email out to our employees to say, hey, please, I know you're super busy. I know a lot of things going on. Please be mindful of the impacts on students and their learning if they're participating in a particular walkout.
When it comes to the teachers, how they interact with the students and kind of share their own thoughts and ideals, and there's always, robust discourse sometimes. How much do you talk about offering personal opinions to masking and vaccinating during this pandemic to the classroom? I mean, is that a conversation you guys have with the teachers?
Well, that's a great question. The things about us is we're really trying to be apolitical, not trying to take a political stance. That's something I think is really important. Things that I've tried to stress. Like, hey, we're here to be a public school system. I understand politics are ingrained in everything, and you could easily, some people say that on this religious exemption, I'm like, well, I don't know. How do you do that in the Middle East, for example? Between your personal beliefs, your religious beliefs, right, and your political. in some places in the world, those are very enmeshed, shall we say. And here in the United States, here in Shelton, that's not necessarily something that we're also not wrestling with. And so I think for me, trying to tell the staff, look, there's some rules, we just got to follow the rules. I don't always have to agree necessarily with all the rules, but when do we start to choose to follow them or not becomes pretty dangerous in my eyes, especially when you're a superintendent, you're trying to uphold things. People are looking for you and this district to follow some rules to keep kids safe, employees safe, keep the learning going, and making sure kids are getting the skills and experiences they need to move forward. And those are tough challenges. And I always, I've helped coach a lot of principals and district leaders over the times, and I said, what the toughest times are? The individual, right, versus the collective whole. Those happen all the time. Discipline's like one of them. It happens all the time. This kid's acting out. Well, there's some things going on in their home life that behavior is a communication. Other people are like, well, get rid of that kid. That kid can't be in school, And so I said, well, if we message that, they don't just go away. And we, our public schools, are responsible for educating that student. So that kid has a right, but the rest of the kids also have a right to a quiet, calm, safe learning environment. So you're trying to wrestle with things. Right now, where we're at with this pandemic is causing us to do that. And I try to remind that to our staff and our school leaders is, hey, let's follow the rules, follow them the best we can. Let's keep going, being mindful of the needs of everyone. And so we're here in this particular position, trying to just, again, keep in-person services as safely as we can.
Wyeth Jessee is the superintendent of the Shelton School District here, and I thank him for the time to talk a little bit through this. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Jeff.